At 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, 8-year-old April Tinsley was walking home through her neighborhood in Fort Wayne, Indiana. It was Good Friday. April had been at a friend's house. The route was familiar. The streets were ordinary. Homes stood close together. Adults were nearby. But April never made it home. 3 days later, searchers found her body in a rural area about 20 miles away. For the next 30 years, no one was arrested. Then the case became even more frightening. A message appeared on a barn door. It claimed responsibility for April's murder. It promised there would be another victim. Years later, more notes appeared. Some were left near the homes of young girls. Along with them were items carrying DNA. The person who killed April seemed to be watching the same community that had been searching for him. And for 3 decades, he remained unknown. Until investigators used a new kind of evidence, not a fingerprint, not a witness, a family tree built from DNA. This is the solved case of April Tinsley. Fort Wayne in 1988 was the kind of place where children still walked to a friend's home by themselves. April Tinsley was 8 years old. To the people around her, April was not a cold case file or a photograph on the news. She was a daughter, a classmate, a child with an ordinary life. April left home on the afternoon of April 1st, 1988. She went to visit a friend. Later, she started walking back. It was a short trip. Nothing about it appeared unusual. But by that evening, April had not returned. Her family began to worry. Soon, the worry became a massive search. Police, volunteers, and neighbors looked for an 8-year-old girl who had vanished in the space between one house and another. There was no clear witness account explaining where she went. No immediate answer. Then, 3 days after April disappeared, a jogger found her body in a rural part of DeKalb County, near the small community of Spencerville. The place was far from the neighborhood where she had last been seen. Her murder shocked Fort Wayne, and it changed the way many parents in the city looked at an ordinary walk home. Investigators had a murder scene. They had physical evidence. They had an enormous number of tips, but they didn't have a name. April's case became one of Indiana's most painful cold cases. Police followed leads. They interviewed suspects. They worked through the evidence available at the time. Nothing led to an arrest. Then, in 1990, 2 years after April was killed, investigators found a message on a barn door near the rural area where her body had been discovered. The writer claimed responsibility for the murder. The message was not simply a cruel act of vandalism. It included details connected to the case, and it contained a threat. For the people who saw it, the meaning was clear. The person responsible had not disappeared. He might still be nearby. The clue gave investigators something important: a sample of handwriting, a location, and a possible window into the offender's behavior. But it also created a new fear. The case was no longer only about what happened to April. It was about the possibility that someone who had taken her life was still close enough to leave a message where police could find it. Years passed. The case stayed open, and the community waited for one call that never came. In the spring of 2004, the fear returned. 4 notes appeared at homes in the Fort Wayne area. Several were left on bicycles belonging to young girls. The notes were placed inside plastic bags. Some came with used condoms. One included Polaroid images of the writer's body. The notes referred to April Tinsley. Investigators believed they had been left by the man who killed her. This mattered for 2 reasons. First, the messages showed that the case was still active in the mind of the person responsible. Second, they created new forensic opportunities. The items left with the notes contained biological evidence. That evidence was compared with the DNA recovered in April's case. Investigators concluded that the DNA profiles were connected. For the first time, detectives had stronger proof that the person taunting the community and the person who killed April were the same man. But they still did not know his identity. The public attention grew. The FBI helped local investigators revisit the cold case. America's Most Wanted aired April's story. Tips came in from across the area. Investigators studied the handwriting. They searched for people who used Polaroid cameras. They followed leads connected to the notes, the barn, and the evidence. Still, nothing produced the name they needed. The killer had made a serious mistake by leaving DNA. But for years, that DNA had no match in the databases available to police. It was a profile without a person. By 2018, forensic genetic genealogy was changing how cold cases could be investigated. The method did not require a direct DNA match to a suspect. Instead, it could identify distant relatives of an unknown person through a public genealogy database. From there, trained genealogists could build family trees. It was slow work. A name from a census record, a marriage record, an old address, a branch of a family moving from one state to another. Eventually, the work could narrow thousands of possibilities down to a few people who fit the evidence. In April's case, investigators sent the unknown DNA profile for genetic genealogy analysis. The search pointed toward a family. Then it narrowed to two brothers in northeast Indiana. One of them was John D. Miller. Miller lived in Grabble, a small community northeast of Fort Wayne. But a genealogy lead was not enough to make an arrest. Detectives still needed a direct DNA comparison. In July 2018, investigators watched Miller's home and collected items from the trash outside. The state crime lab tested the samples. The DNA matched the evidence connected to April's murder and the 2004 notes. On July 15, 2018, detectives approached Miller. According to court documents, when officers asked whether he knew why they were there, he said April's name. He later confessed to abducting and killing her. After 30 years, the unknown DNA profile had a name. The arrest did not erase what April's family had lost, but it ended the uncertainty that had followed them since 1988. In December 2018, John D. Miller pleaded guilty to murder and child molesting in April Tinsley's death. A judge sentenced him to 80 years in prison. The sentence reflected both the murder of April and the sexual abuse connected to the crime. For April's family, the court hearing was not a happy ending. There is no sentence that restores a child to her family. There is no amount of time that returns the years taken away. But there was an answer. For 3 decades, Fort Wayne had carried the image of an unknown man, a man who left messages, a man who seemed to know how to stay invisible. Now, the evidence had connected the case to one person: the handwriting, the notes, the DNA, the genealogy work, the discarded items from the trash, and the confession. They formed a chain. No single breakthrough solved everything on its own. The case was solved because old evidence was preserved, because investigators kept working, because new technology made a new path possible, and because detectives did not treat a family tree lead as the final answer. They used it to find the person whose DNA could be tested. That distinction matters. Genetic genealogy pointed the investigation in the right direction. The direct DNA comparison and Miller's guilty plea closed the case. Miller died while in custody in 2025. But April's story does not end with him. April Tinsley disappeared during a walk that should have lasted only a few minutes. Her name became known because of the terrible mystery that followed. But the final chapter of this case is not only about fear, it is about persistence. The people investigating April's murder did not have the tools they needed in 1988. They did not have them in 1990. They did not have them when the notes appeared in 2004. Still, the evidence was kept. The file was reopened. The leads were followed again. And 30 years later, a new technology gave investigators one more chance. April was 8 years old. Her case should never have taken 3 decades to solve. But it was solved. Not through rumor. Not through a guess. Through evidence. And for a family that had waited since Good Friday in 1988, that evidence finally brought an answer.